Chapter 33. The broad stream was running so furiously that there was little need of oars, though the Gorsim held them ready to fend off their vessels from rocks and to keep the log-boats in mid-stream. Tam sat in the stern of Torgi's big boat, his paws clenched tight to the gunwales. He gazed about in awe. To his right, high limestone cliffs towered over the waters. To his left, rocks were broken into large chunks, overgrown by trees and vines. He realised they were speeding down an ever-narrowing slope, which concentrated the stream so greatly that little could be heard but the roaring of water. A fine spray enveloped every beast. Logolog Torgi sat beside Tam, his eyes narrowing against the rushing spray. The shrew chieftain manoeuvred the tiller skilfully with one paw, while signalling directions to the other log-boats in his wake. They were travelling ahead of the other boats. Tam glanced back upstream, shouting to Torgi, "No sign of Gulo on the vermin, mate." Torgi called back, "Keep your eyes peeled on that left bank. That's the route they'll be following." Skipper was in the last logboat. He balanced upright, steadying himself on his broad rudder as he peered back upstream. His keen eyes caught movement. Pointing, he roared at the top of his voice, "They're on the river! Coming fast this way!" Tam and Logolog both turned to look. In their wake, the broad stream resembled a single long and narrowing avenue. In the distance, the big willow trunk was thundering downstream, loaded with vermin. Gulo could be seen standing high amid the roots which formed the prow. The wolverine was gesturing madly as he exhorted his crew to paddle with branches and spears. Tam's first reaction was one of alarm. The huge tree seemed to be gaining on them, travelling at a very fast pace indeed. Logolog Torgi nudged a nearby shrew. Together they studied the unusual craft racing along in their wake. Then they held a hasty, whispered conference, both smiling and nodding. The borderer looked inquiringly at the Gorsim chieftain. "What's so funny, mate?" Torgi pointed ahead. There was a turn coming up in the distance, where a massive rocky outcrop poked out into the water. He put his mouth close to Tam's ear. "Wait till we round that curve and you'll see." He waved to the other logboats, pointing to the curve and nodding off to the left. They signalled back that they had understood the order. Immediately all the Gorsim crews dipped their oars and began paddling strongly with the headlong current. All the logboats shot forward. Lance-Jack Wildery was seated in the prow of the big front boat. He became so exhilarated by the sudden turn of speed on the wild waters that he rose up roaring, "Ryan, let her go, chaps!" A stern old shrew shoved the young hare down, clambering over him to crouch in the very peak of the prow. "Keep your head down, matey. I've got to watch out for the chief's signals. Stay out of my way now." The hares in all the boats had drawn their weapons at first, thinking that Gulo and his vermin might overtake them, but when it became obvious that he would not, they put up their arms and clung tight to the gunwales, their ears blowing out straight behind them as the logboat skimmed over the boiling waters. The shrews in the prows of other boats began uncoiling stout ropes with grappling hooks attached. Logolog and Tam watched as the forebeast tried to put on more speed. Gulo, lashing about with a long whippy willow bough, exhorted them to greater efforts. Torgi shouted to Tam above the watery din, "Grab this tiller with me. Now, when I call starboard, you push it to the right with all your might. Got that?" Tam nodded, repeating the instruction. "Starboard, push to the right." He set both paws on the tiller, gripping it fiercely. Suddenly, the bend was upon them. Tam felt Logolog Torgi tense. Then the shrew warrior bellowed out his commands. "Starboard! Starboard! Push for your life!" Bracing his footpaws against the port bulkhead, Tam pushed until veins stood out upon his neck. Water was dashing into the logboats as shrews in the prows whirled ropes with grappled ends and cast them. A hidden inlet, disguised by overhanging trees, was right around the bend. Tam felt the big logboat shudder as it turned sideways into the melee of water. He caught but a brief glimpse of the rocks on the right, looming up at the stern, before a powerful shock knocked him almost flat. The shrew in the prow had thrown his rope, its grapnels thunking into the body of an ancient pine. Gorsim shrews threw themselves upon the ropes, hauling madly. Logboats heeled almost onto their sides as a bounding current pounded them. Then they righted. Ropes thrummed tautly, and the boats were hauled swiftly into the tree-covered inlet. Tam found himself soaked to the fur and gasping for breath, still gripping the tiller. Logolog Torgi patted the warrior squirrel's back, complimenting him. "We'll make a stream beast of you yet, Tam. Well done, mate." Then the Gorsim leader turned his attention to the other boats. "All craft in now.
All shipped on boats well hid.
Skipper, whose logboat was last to be hauled in, gave Torgy a wave.
All craft and tied up tight, chief.
One of the hares whispered to Three Shrew. Rather neat, what? You chaps do this often? Looking grim, she responded. No beast ever tried it afore. We're the first to do it. I thought it was all dead beasts for a while back there. The young hare's ears stood up rigid. Good grief, you might have told us 'twas your first time. Tam could not help but smile. Would it have made any difference? Skipper murmured to Torgy. They should be here soon. What if they sees us as they pass by? The shrew chieftain shrugged.
Wouldn't make any difference if we stuck our tongues out and them sang rude songs, mate. They wouldn't be able to stop. That tree's headed for a waterfall so steep you can hardly see to the bottom. Though if you did, you wouldn't like it. The bottom of those falls is nothing but a big heap of rocks sticking up. Mark my words, Skip. Gulo and his scummy crew, all dead beasts.
As it happened, Gulo did not spot the hidden cove as the big willow trunk shot by. He was too busy lashing about at his vermin and yelling out over the din of the wild water.
Faster! More speed! Keep going, you idle fools!
With no beast to steer or otherwise control it, the huge bulk of the fallen tree continued to hurtle through the water as it went through the currents. Veering into the right, the massive tree trunk eventually struck the enormous outcrop of rock directly on the bend. Were it not for his powerful claws, which he had latched onto the trunk after releasing his willow whip, Gulo would have died on the impact. Then disaster struck the tree, the shock of the collision turning it end to end, and it carried on, turning and turning and turning. The wolverine and his terrified crew clung to the log, lost in a whirling chaos of water and rock, the sky revolving above them. When Tam and Doogy last caught sight of them, the vermin were gripping tight aboard the spinning log, screaming and yelling as it swept out of sight around the bend. Log-a-log Doogy relaxed his hold on the tiller.
There's about 6 more bends before they reach a big waterfall. When they hit the bottom, there won't be enough left of them to scrape up in a basket.
Tam looked stunned, but he responded to the shrew's remark.
Good riddance to bad rubbish, mate.
Leaving the logboat securely moored to the trees, they clambered ashore over the rocks. Gorsim cooks found a convenient spot among the conifers to set up camp. There was a fire built, water fetched from the stream, and wet garments set out to dry. Every beast took their ease, weary after their ordeal on the wild waters, which could still be heard thundering along in the background. Tam sat with Skipper and Doogy, watching the westering sun setting distant trees into silhouettes tinged with purple and gold. The trio was silent, each with his own thoughts, until the shrew chieftain stroked his beard reflectively.
Oh, mates, a good end to a long, hard day, huh?
Tam began slowly honing the blade of his dirk against a rock.
Aye, 'twas that. Though I'll wager Gulo the Savage hadn't even had that day on his journey to Hellgates. I never kept my vow to slay him, though.
Skipper flicked drops of water from his rudder.
You ought to bless fate for that, Tam. We should thank Mother Nature for taking care of that one. I don't think any 10 beasts would have faced a monster like Gulo in combat. That is a mad sailor and a flesh-eater. You're a warrior, Tam, but don't think you'd have stood a chance against a beast like Gulo the Savage.
The borderer tested the edge of his blade. We'll never know now, will we? Sensing the challenge in Tam's voice, Log-a-Log Doogy changed the direction of the conversation.
Makes no difference now, mates. Old Gulo's out the way, and you're headed back to Redwall.
Tam nodded.
First thing in the morning, and we'll have to step out sharp. The Abbey's probably under attack by 100 vermin. Remember, Gulo split his forces.
Skipper looked grim.
You're right there. Hope our friends aren't in any difficulties. I hate to think old Humble and my young Brookflow was in any trouble. I expect you feel the same way about Sister Armalay, Tam.
The warrior looked surprised.
I hope they're all safe and well, Skip. Why would I be particularly worried about the sister?
The otter chieftain chuckled.
Yeah, fully on the beast, Rakkety Tam MacBurl. Every beast noticed the way you two was gazing at each other and whispering together.
Suddenly Tam was lost for words. He was saved by the arrival of Lance Jack Wildery.
I say, you chaps, are you going to sit there chantering away all blinking evening, or do you want some scoff?
It was Gorsim tradition that whilst on campaign, the log-a-log was served first. Out of deference to the shrews, the long patrol hares observed this rule. Gathered around the spread the cooks had set out for them, both groups eagerly awaited Doogy's arrival, which would signal that it was time to dig into the feast. Upon his appearance, however, the shrew chieftain first had a few words to say.
Comrades, It's a fine meal laid out for us, and I want you to enjoy it and give thanks for living through today. Not just us Gotham, but you Hes too. We lost some fine friends today. Good shrews and gallant Hes. Our victory was gained, but at a price, so I want you to give a moment's silence and think of ones who ain't with us to share these good victuals.
In the silence that followed, the Gorsim thought of their mates who had been lost whilst freeing the broad stream of the fallen willow. Many wept openly. The long patrol hares kept a stiff upper lip, but it was hard. They all had memories of gallant Corporal Butty Wapscott, who had given his life for his friends. Tam thought of Butty too. He had been very fond of the jolly corporal. At the same time, he could not help thinking of Doogy. Where was the little Highlander? Was he safe and well? Then his mind wandered to other things. His feelings for Sister Armel were just as Skipper had expressed them. Tam smiled to himself as he reflected on what an unlikely match they made. The warrior and the gentle healer. The reverie was broken when a shrew cook held out a plate of stew, some rough bread and a beaker of shrew beer to Tam.
Here, matey, get that lot inside of you.
As night fell over the waters and the woodlands, they did what warriors always did after a long hard day. Ate well, drank heartily, told tales, and especially popular with the young hares along patrol, sang songs. One Meriscot Fieldbud, a haremaid with a trilling voice, entertained them with a barracks room monologue.
Well, Peter and Tarzan, upon my word, I am the Primrose Warrior. The day I joined the Long Patrol, no maid was ever sorrier. They woke me up at the break of dawn and sent me off to war. Before I'd had a chance to bathe or dust each dainty paw, I went away to fight the foe, with comrades rude and rough. They never seen a perfume spray, much less a powder puff. With not a drop of daisy balm or any rosehip lotion, I marked along a dreadful sight, my ears shook with emotion. Then soon we faced the enemy, and it was my firm belief, between that awful scruffy lot was not one handkerchief. What were their mothers thinking of? Not one had washed his face. I mentioned to my officer, they looked a real disgrace. All filled with indignation then, I charged them single-pawed, with boudoir miller for a shield and parasol for a sword. I curled their ears and brushed their teeth and wiped their runny noses, then sprayed on toilet water until they smelt like roses. They ran away in swift retreat, then grappled so unseemly. My general then promoted me for beating them so cleanly. So when you see me on parade, you chaps must all salute. I'm called the Primrose Major now, and isn't that a hoot? Every beast laughed and applauded, especially the shoes. Loggerlock Torgy remarked to the Lancejack,
That one's a pretty little maid, isn't she?
Wildery nodded.
She is indeed, sir, but don't be fooled. Meriscot is hard as steel and death with lance. She's what you call a perilous beauty, what?
Togi observed dryly.
All these young uns are perilous, both shrews and Hes. 'Tis a life we chose.
He turned to Skipper.
Well, matey, what do you reckon to Ghost and Stewie?
The burly otter was into his third bowl.
Oh, very tasty, very nice. But haven't you buckos ever heard about root pepper?
Torgy pulled a wry face.
Aye, but that stuff's a bit too warm for Ghost's stomachs. No doubt you'll soon be slipping it down when you get to Abbey. They've probably got lots of hot root pepper there.
The otter chieftain gazed fondly into the fire.
They do indeed, mate. Good old Redwall. Can't wait for dawn when we begin the march to my Abbey.
Dawn came soon enough, sooner than some expected, who were looking forward to a late sleep. The camp came a bustle with hastily taken breakfast. Loggerlog Torgy briefed Tam and Skipper.
I'm taking my crews back off to the log boats. Got some business to see to, mates. Redwall's about a couple of days good marching from here. I'll leave you 1 shrew and 2 shrew, and I'll guide you back to Abbey.
After they'd said their goodbyes, Tam found that, in the absence of Corporal Butty Wapscott, he was left to give the orders. The borderer did so with practised ease. Soon his bark was echoing around the camp.
Come on now, me lucky lads and lasses. Time to march for Redwall. Fall in the long patrol. Lance, Jack and Fieldbud, front and centre. Right markers fall in. Attention! Look to your dressing, you sloppy lot of fiddle-pawed, wobble-lugged excuses for hares. Silence in the ranks there. By the left. Quick march. Up two, up two, up two.
The column strode off briskly through the morning woodlands. One of the young hares murmured to his companion, "Struth, did you hear Mr. MacBurl then? I thought it was the old Sergeant Ronwell for a blinking moment." His friend replied,
Sounded jolly well like him, what? Nearly brought a tear to me flipping eye, thinking about Sarge Ronwell. Grumpy old gravel-gutted beast. I miss him. I'll bring a tear to your eye, laddie buck. The young hare cut his eye sideways to see Tam marching on the other side of him. The borderer looked every inch the sergeant major, with his dirk tucked horizontally like a swagger stick. He scowled ferociously at the talkers. I'll bring so many tears to both your eyes you'll think you're marching under water. Now straighten those soldiers, move those paws and shut those mouths. No gossiping in the ranks. Do you hear me? Both hares tucked their chins in and bawled simultaneously. Yes, sir! No gossiping in the ranks, sir! Tam fell back a pace or two, smiling to himself. Skipper caught up with him, nodding his admiration. That sounded good, mate. Where'd you learn to give orders like that? 'Twas just like proper roughneck officer. Tam shrugged. Oh, you're in there, you know, Skip. For the past few seasons I've been in the service of a full Squirrelking. You sort of pick it up as you go along. Mid-afternoon, the shrew scouts reported back. One shrew and her sister had nothing urgent to convey. The route was clear, and they had picked out a good spot for an early evening stopover. Tam dismissed them, and then called out to his hares. Listen up now, you bedraggled, bewildered beauties. Our scouts have found an early evening layover spot. Do you want to stop there or march until dark and see if we can make Redwall Abbey in record time? A roar of well-drilled voices came back at him. March on, sir! March on! Skipper surprised Tam by bellowing out. March on it is, you lolloping lullies. Keep the pace, Lair. I want to get to Redwall before I grow old. I need a stick. Step lively there. The otter chieftain winked at Tam. How do you think I did? Tam saluted his friend. Well done, Skip. You're a born sergeant major. We'll share the commands from here to Redwall. Skipper beamed like a morning sunrise. Right, sergeant. They camped that night at another spot the shrew scouts had chosen further on. It was dark and the marchers were weary. Tam and his company bathed their paws in a small brook. After a short snack of haversack rations, they curled up in a shaded glade and fell asleep immediately. Skipper was awake shortly after daybreak. He roused the hares like a true regimental sergeant. Come on, me little beauties, up on your dainty paws now. Right, who'll make a lovely breakfast of fresh salad, hot scones and some blackberry tarts? A gullible young hare stretched and yawned. Oh, I say, sir, that just fit the bill nicely. The otter chieftain gave him a jaundiced eye, roaring at the unfortunate in a voice like thunder. Well, you ain't going to get nothing like that here, laddie buck. Grab an apple and some water, then up on your hunkers and get fell in for marching, you lolloped, bottle-nosed, misbegotten muddlers. Move on or I'll have your gut for garters and your tails for tea. Tam winked at the other's verbosity. I like that one, Skip. Misbegotten muddlers. I must remember that. How far to the Abbey now, I wonder? Skipper studied the woodlands ahead. Not too far now, mate. I'm starting to recognise a few landmarks. 1 shrew and 2 shrew are good little maids. They're tracking well. And if we make fast time, I reckon we'll reach the Abbey early tomorrow morning. They marched on through the day, making only one brief halt in the early noontide. Just before dusk, they stopped at a place the 2 Gworsome sisters had chosen for the night's rest. It was situated on a stream bank. Skipper nodded with satisfaction. Well, root me rudder, mate. Do you recognise this place? Tam dabbled his paws in the cooling waters. Every word's beginning to look the same to me, Skip. I'm a borderer, not a woodlander. Where are we? The otter pointed slightly downstream. Round about there. That's where what's-his-name, the pesky little vole-robber, hid your sword and the flag. Let's see. He dived like an arrow into the water and streaked away beneath the surface. Not having heard Skipper's conversation with Tam, the hares watched him in awe. 2 of the most opinionated in the group exchanged comments. Struth, must have some blinking energy, what? Marching since dawn, then going off for a jolly old swim like that. Indeed, you wouldn't catch me doing that, old lad. Dabble the paws a bit, that's my style. Where's the Skipper gone, sir? Tam lay back on the bank, closing his eyes. Wait and see. They had not long to wait. Shortly thereafter, Skipper bounded up onto the bank and tossed a long wrapped bundle to Tam. Found these in a hole on the other bank, right where that rascal stored them a while back. Tam unwrapped the wet banner of Squirrelking Araltum from about his claymore. He wielded the blade fondly. My thanks to you, Skip. You've done me a great favour. Skipper shook himself like a dog, spraying some young hares with water. My pleasure, Tam. The sun will dry your flag out tomorrow. You can polish your sword up in the following morning. You can march into the Abbey double-bladed, waving the flag and singing your head off. Tam looked thoughtful. Maybe, Skip. That's if Redwall hasn't been taken by the vermin.